Can profit and social impact ever go hand in hand? That is the question on today's edition of Inside AB. I am Shruti Nair and this is Bernd Debusmann. So Bernd, let's start with this week's cover about Badr Jafar. So what is it and what are the recent announcements that he made?
Well, he had a really big announcement in September. So Gulftainer, which is a part of Crescent Enterprises, the company which he runs, they signed a 50-year, $600 million concession to develop and operate the port of Wilmington, which is in Delaware on the east coast of the U.S.
Okay.
It's the largest investment ever made by a private UAE company in the U.S. So it's very significant, and it's his second foray into the U.S. because he'd also invested previously in Cape Canaveral in Florida. And so they're quite excited about this, as is the state of Delaware.
Right, but the investment goes beyond the port industry, doesn't it?
It does. I spoke to a guy named Jeffrey Bullock, who's the Secretary of State of Delaware, and he said that, one of the biggest impacts is that it's creating jobs for Americans, which of course in America, that's always a politically hot topic is, who's creating jobs.
Right.
So he thinks that, at the moment there's about 5,000 or 6,000 people that work in the port, and there might be as many as 5,000 additional jobs that come from this. But even beyond that, this ports deal also includes training for about 1,000 people a year. So some of them might work at the port, some of them might go work elsewhere.
Right.
And of course, there's a kind of an important factor that historically the U.S. hasn't been that open to investment from the Middle East. People remember in 2006, DP World had a lot of issues when they were investing in American ports. So both Badr Jafar and Mr. Bullock told me that this is kind of a way to bridge the gap between cultures even, because at the end of the day, everyone wants the same things, jobs and security and everything. So it's impactful in that way as well.
Agreed, but Crescent Enterprises is a vast company. So how does this sort of impact investing manifest itself across its business?
Well, there's a couple different things that he told me that is quite interesting. For one, there's an internal incubator inside Crescent Enterprises, and they've come up with some really kind of interesting ideas. One, they noticed that laborers in the Gulf don't have clothing made specifically for the temperatures here. So what they've done is they've started a line of clothing called Shamal, which has sensors in the clothing. It reads the vital signs of the laborer so that the foreman at a labor site, if something's amiss, for example, if someone's heart starts palpitating too quickly because of the heat, they'll know immediately. Also, they've started recently a coffee chain called Kava and Chai, which he thinks will eventually rival Starbucks. But it's not just the coffee chain. What he does is he wants to bring back the concept of coffee houses in the old Arab way.
Okay.
Of course, coffee originated in Yemen. And he wants to make it kind of like a community center with poetry. So far, there's 2 of them. One's at AU Sharjah and one's in, but there will be a few more in the next year. So these things, again, they plan to make money off them, obviously, but there's impact beyond what is the bottom line of the company.
So this kind of investment has an impact beyond the port also, doesn't it?
It does. Of course, jobs in the U.S. is always a politically hot issue, and what it's going to do, it's going to create a lot of jobs for Americans in the state of Delaware. There's currently about 5,000 or 6,000 people that work in the port. There may be as many as 5,000 additional jobs created because of this. They'll also be training about 1,000 people each year. So, that has a wider effect on the economy.
Right.
But importantly, both Badr Jafar and Mr. Bullock told me that they think it kind of helps bridge the gap between cultures. Of course, in the U.S., historically, there's been some resistance to Middle Eastern companies coming in for various reasons, like DP World in 2006. But, these sorts of deals help bring people together. That's what the UAE ambassador said when this deal was signed as well. So in that way, it's much larger than just a business deal.
Right. So Crescent Enterprises, of course, it's a huge company and it's a vast enterprise in itself. So what does this sort of impact have across the business itself?
Well, they do a lot of different things. There's all sorts of different companies within Crescent Enterprises. But one interesting thing they told me is they have an internal incubator where employees bring their ideas to the company, and if it's a good idea, the company will go forward with it.
Okay.
So one of their ideas is Shamal, which is a clothing line. They noticed that there's not really workwear designed for laborers in the Gulf. Obviously, it's really hot here.
Yeah.
So this clothing line has tiny sensors, and the foreman at a work site can tell when something's medically going wrong with a particular worker.
Oh, okay.
And it's also the same fabric as, for example, a footballer or a golfer will use, which is kind of amazing. Nobody had thought of this before, but now, so obviously that's
and it's super useful and helpful.
And helping a lot of people. And
Yeah.
it's not, you're not inventing anything. You're just, using what's already available for a better purpose.
But have they started giving this out already?
That I'm not sure. I don't think so. I think it's still in the works.
Okay, all right. So what is a lesson that enterprises and the other businesses across need to learn and take from this?
Well, one thing that Badr Jafar told me was that when he meets with other businessmen, he thinks people say that you're either making profit or you're having a purpose, but you can't do both. But in his view, it's not like a zero-sum game. And you actually lose a lot of opportunities if you only think in terms of, for example, purpose, like an NGO, or profit. So he thinks, if companies are amoral, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but they're missing out on a lot of opportunities to do good and make money at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Doing good and making money looks like social enterprises is the next big thing, not just in the UAE, but across the world. We will be back again tomorrow at 10 a.m. with another set of stories to discuss on Inside AB. So don't forget to follow, like, share, and subscribe.